So it's been a long while since we recorded something. 2 whole weeks. But as Kaylee said, supposedly we've done this every year during the holidays. I don't remember ever going this long. This is the longest I think I've ever went without recording a review, video, discussion, anything for the channel.
Yeah.
We
just always have a slower end of the year.
I think I did a couple lives during this though. Right?
Yeah, you did.
But no, traditional reviews or anything.
Yeah.
So we watched a few movies. We actually, weirdly, during these 2 weeks, you would think we've got 50 films watched or something, but no, there's been sicknesses and there's been all sorts of wild stuff happening. Tooth problems and money issues, and the list goes on and on. Yeah. So we ended up not really watching all that much during this, but we watched a few things.
We did.
And really, we've been stuck on the classic films that neither of us have seen, or I've seen, but only once and a while ago. And I was like, all right, we need to revisit these movies because they have such a huge cultural impact on the genre as a whole. And they're so influential that I just can't not have it in my arsenal, while discussing film anymore. This is these kind of black areas in my filmography, as is yours.
Yeah.
And so
it's been fun watching them.
Yeah. So we're gonna start with Peeping Tom.
Yes.
Probably because it was our favorite of the ones we watched
so far.
So this was, of course, okay. Now, this one is connected most to the movie Psycho for obvious reasons, because both are likened to being the precursor, the godfather of the slasher film. And there's always kind of been this debate, the back and forth, like a Sex Pistols, Ramones kind of thing on which one was it? And this film, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure from what I saw, this film did come out a few months earlier than Psycho. Now, just because a film came out earlier does not mean that it is the most influential. So that's not the best evidence to it being that film. But I do think there is a lot of evidence here to support that it might have had just as big, if not a bigger, impact on slashers. But
yeah,
I'm not 100% on that yet. I think we need to discuss it, and we'll get more into that, because first thing on that is putting the film aside, because I think that an important topic when it comes to this film is its slasher roots and how it connects to Psycho for being that film that influenced a whole subgenre of cinema that dominated the genre during the 80s. So while I do feel that while watching this film, this holds more similarities to the structure we know as a slasher film, yes. That said, I don't know what impact it for sure had on the landscape, only because of the fact that Psycho is much, much more relevant in the public's eye. So if we're talking about it in the context of today, where we have access to films unlimitedly, yeah, sure, it feels that way.
Yeah.
But when you're talking about, going back to the slasher heyday, when you go to films like Black Christmas, Texas Chainsaw, Halloween, Friday the 13th, Bay of Blood, whatever ones you want to point to, I have no doubt that certain directors were influenced by Peeping Tom to a degree. But it needs to be brought into the conversation that Psycho was a phenomenon. Psycho was an Alfred Hitchcock film. It was very well received when it came out, albeit shocking, of course. It was still thought of as a classic film by the time the slasher subgenre was starting to be created. And so I feel like more eyes were on that. Now you can look at Mario Bava, who created another template, which would be Blood and Black Lace, along with Twitch of the Death Nerve, aka, Bay of Blood, which I already mentioned. And he had gained a lot of inspiration from Hitchcock because he was like a huge Hitchcock fan and wore that, on his sleeve. And so it's weird because while I watch this one, I do find that the similarities between this and other slasher movies is a little bit more apparent. But I also have to think that because of Psycho being so relevant, so at the forefront of everyone's mind when it comes to horror movies at that time, because in the 70s and in 1974 when Black Christmas came out and stuff like that, Psycho's only 14 years old. That's not that old. That's pretty modern. It's more of a modern film, and it's of course going to be in the public's mind because it's a Hitchcock film. And this was a film that the director of this got a lot of grief for, and it basically ended his career.
Yeah. I feel like I can see the influence of both.
Absolutely.
On the slasher genre.
That's undeniable.
Yeah. I don't know if I would say one or the other. I mean, I guess your argument about like just because Psycho was more in the public eye, I guess it would make sense for it to be that, but they both have a little bit that clearly influence the genre, like going forward. I really liked this movie. I didn't really know what to expect from it, because everybody does always kind of compare this to Psycho, and it's a very different film to Psycho. Like it does not have the same feel at all. Psycho feels like kind of like highbrow horror almost in certain sense.
Yeah.
And this felt more like a sleazy slasher like the entire time.
Yeah.
But what I like about both this film and Psycho, what I love about both of them, is that the killer has a personality and has interesting qualities to them that you're like, you want to know more, and it just makes it a more compelling character. Because we've talked a lot about, especially when we were doing like our Friday the 13th reviews and whatnot, Michael and Jason and like all these masked killers that have no personalities except for what's projected on them by the fan base. It's very different from, Mark from Peeping Tom, and, it's just a totally different feeling.
They're also very complementary films to one another, and because you could like mirror them off of each other, with one kind of filling in where the other one isn't. Like as far as Norman Bates gets all of his killer instinct from the abuse that was brought onto him by his mother, and Mark is, his killer instinct comes from his abuse of his father. Right, so it's like the dichotomy of like the two halves to make a whole. And if you were to like take these films and give kind of a very basic description of them, like there's a influential slasher film, like maybe the Godfather of slasher films, that came out in 1960. The title starts with a P. It's about a young man who has an affinity for women, but because of a traumatic past with his parents, he's compelled to kill them.
Right.
Like that is literally the exact same template. Right?
Yeah.
Like it's all there.
Right.
And they are very complementary to each other in that way. And and I think, was it this movie? Or was it, I think it was a different movie. Wasn't there another movie we watched, or was it this one, where the director bought the rights before Alfred Hitchcock could within hours? Remember I read you that?
I don't remember what it was.
We watched something, or was it Eyes Without a Face?
Might have been.
I think it was Eyes Without a Face is what it might have been.
Yeah.
Anyway.
I don't know, but this film, like it's really cool. I really liked the cinematography. I like the setup. I think it's a really like interesting and unique setup for a killer. And just there's a lot that like was done with like some of the set design and like locations specifically that I was into. Like it's nothing you know, like it's not super like artsy set designs or anything, but I just really enjoyed all the locations and found them to be very like relevant, of course, to the plot. But yeah, and Mark was just like a really interesting character, like all throughout the whole film. Him and his relationships in the film I found to be fascinating, and his reactions to things and all of that.
Yeah. So as far, I mean, now that we've kind of discussed that to a degree, with there's plenty of dissection there and debate you can have over Peeping Tom versus Psycho as to which one's more influential. Because like the opening of this movie, there is no doubt in my mind. It would be shocking to me to find out that this is just coincidental.
Mm.
But the opening of this film is almost identical, mirroring The Burning.
Mm.
It's so similar.
Yeah.
It has a similar look. It has a complete, like it has a very similar feel and premise to it and
Yeah.
everything. Like the whole opening, I was like, this is The Burning. Like
Yeah.
this is, outside of him being deformed. But another thing that goes to the argument. So now, if you were to just lay out the films one side by side, because this is where I said the argument differs, is like you have the one side of the thing where I'm saying Psycho's relevance and its notoriety is an element of contention. Where I'm sitting there going, okay, this is why Psycho is a stronger contender in that way. But on the flip side of that, if we were to actually break the films down and take apart them piece by piece and cherry pick the elements out of it, I do think that Peeping Tom has more relevance to the slasher subgenre just from what I saw within it.
Yeah.
And a lot of it has to do with its sleazy nature. It has
Yeah.
to do with him kind of being associated with a smut peddler, and he has an iconic killer weapon, which is the front of his tripod that he has a blade under,
Right.
and stuff like that. There's Psycho has some of it too.
Yes.
So, and because the thing that Psycho has that this movie does not have, and this is where the argument then shifts back to Psycho's favor, is that in Psycho, and this isn't always the case with slashers. Slashers can be one or the other. But primarily the way we think of slashers, as well as we think of giallos, specifically giallos, is that they are a murder mystery. They are a whodunit. Right. Now, on the flip side of that very same argument, I told Kaylee while we were watching this, Psycho isn't a whodunit until the end, where you find out the twist is it's a whodunit. Right. That is the twist of Psycho, is that you think it's Norman's mom the whole time, and it isn't Norman's mom. Right. So with this one, it's Mark. You see him, you watch him kill people. Right. With the other one, the character is in shadow.
Yeah.
And we see a silhouette, or we see, certain features that make it seem like it's a woman. And so, there is a twist and a reveal of a whodunit kind of thing going on in Psycho. It's not a traditional whodunit. So it does have that in its favor. But with this one, it is more of a character study.
Yes.
Like Maniac.
That's what I liked.
Right? Which is a different subgenre of slashers into itself, because there's not a lot of those. There's like Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer. There's Maniac. There are those character pieces where we follow the killer more than we follow the victims, like Silent Night, Deadly Night, or something, where we follow the story of the killer through the majority of the film and the characters that he encounters, the protagonist. There's not really a protagonist, right?
Well, yeah, because you're not really rooting for Mark in this, obviously, but
you are and you aren't, because he's a very sympathetic killer.
He is sympathetic, but he's definitely not the protagonist. He's like but that's what I liked about this, is that we get to spend so much time with him and like seeing what's going through his head and kind of like trying to figure out his motivations, and like as this movie goes on, like discovering parts of his past and everything that piece together the picture of like why he became this way.
Yeah.
So I really enjoyed that. And I generally do like that because I think that as much as I love like Halloween and Friday the 13th and everything, it's cool to get the other perspective and to know like it doesn't make it so that you can like excuse what they're doing or anything, but it just makes for a more interesting character.
And as far, I mean, I haven't even touched on this because we've just been dissecting, um, its influences on the genre. As far as the film itself, in my opinion towards it, I think it's an all timer. I think
Mm.
it's phenomenal.
Mm-hmm.
Like I loved it, loved it.
Mm-hmm.
I think it has every right to stand next to Psycho. And honestly, if I was to see both of these solo, back to back for the first time, this would probably be my preferred film.
Oh, really? Mm.
Um, because Psycho has a legacy, because I grew up with it, because I love the sequels, and that adds to the Norman Bates character
Yeah.
and all of that stuff. It is kind of an unfair advantage at this point, alongside something like Bates Motel. Like
Sure.
there's a whole history of Psycho now,
Yeah.
right? I've been to the Bates Motel, at Universal Studios, and I grew up watching the sequels all the time, especially Part Three, and so that's a staple of my childhood at this point. So it's hard to stack them up against each other in an honest way now, but I do try to disconnect myself from the nostalgia and all that stuff, and really, and Kaylee really honestly is a good source for this, because you saw Psycho and the sequels and Bates Motel pretty recently,
Yeah.
right? You were first
Psycho.
introduced into all of that lore and all of that stuff, and you were
Yeah.
a big fan of Psycho coming out of it, and were wanting, itching for more.
Yeah.
Um, so, how do you feel about your feelings towards Psycho when you very first watched it, which was like a couple years ago, versus this, and how you felt about this one?
I really love this one too, but I still have had a stronger reaction, I feel like, to Psycho
Mhm.
than I did to this movie. But and it's not to say like obviously there's no sequels or anything. You can't do a sequel with this film, but prequels would have been interesting, of course, to see like more of Mark's story. Um,
No, I think
but
this movie's
I don't
perfect
know.
as a
I
one-off.
yeah, I ultimately I think that like the story just is like it's contained in this film, and I don't really have that many questions about like anything that happened that I would want more information on, or like want more time with a character or anything, because I obviously like with Psycho with Norman Bates, it's weird because Mark does have he's very awkward and odd in this a lot of the time. There's like a few moments where it sort of comes across as charming, but watching it most of the time I felt just kind of a little off put by him, which I think is good. Like I think that's what his character should be. Um, but with Psycho, like I was charmed by Norman Bates. So it's like those are
Right.
differences in those characters where I think that because of the way that Norman is portrayed by Anthony Perkins, like you do want more of it, you know.
I don't know. Yes, I agree to a degree, but at the same time, just storyline wise,
Mm,
maybe not, connection to the characters and whatnot, because you are saying what is true when it comes to how their characters are portrayed. Yes, Mark is much more awkward. That being said, he still has a love interest in this
yes.
who is very much all about him.
Yeah.
And it is tragic
Yeah.
that, he doesn't get to be with her, and that
Sure.
she doesn't get to be with him. Like when it comes to Psycho, Marion Crane, she has no interest in Norman. She never was gonna
No.
be with Norman. Nobody was gonna be with Norman. Norman is like a child in a man's body.
Mm,
He's broken to a degree that he couldn't ever attract anything that he wants. He
mm-hmm.
has this, part of him that's completely closed off because of what he thinks of himself through the lens of his mother.
Yeah.
And with this guy, And it's hard too because I think this movie deserves a lot of analyzation when it
Yeah.
comes to his character and the abuse and what exactly his father was even trying to like get out of him or
Yeah.
other women. I honestly am not 100% sure yet how I feel about what was happening to him as a kid. It was awful, of course, but I'm more curious on like what his father's intentions were exactly, um, with his kid and what he wanted from him. Um, and this is something I'd love to watch, a few more times
Mm.
and really get to know better because at this point I've seen Psycho and Psycho 2 and Psycho 3, many, many, many
Right.
times. So I really feel like I know Norman Bates. I've watched Bates Motel twice, right? I've seen Psycho 4 maybe 2 or 3 times at this point. So I've seen his entire shit. I've even seen the Bates Motel
Oh yeah, the
movie with
TV
Bud
show.
Cort,
We love that.
which everyone hates
um,
that we actually really enjoyed.
yeah, I think this movie definitely deserves like rewatches, of course. Like it would be wonderful to watch it again and do like a proper spoiler discussion, even though we've sort of said spoilers in this, but like a spoiler discussion slasher Sunday with this would be really fun to do because I do think that there's a lot, like you said,
You're
to
right.
dissect with the character. But
Yeah.
I mean, as far as like this review goes and like our initial reactions, I think we both really loved it, and it's definitely something that if you haven't seen it and you're a slasher fan or a horror fan, like you should watch it for sure.
I was really shocked, and this is like one of the last things I'll say because you're right. We can rewatch it,
Yes.
and I can write down notes, and we can dissect every scene like we do in our like slasher Sunday discussions. Because we didn't do any of that here. This is more of a,
No.
is this more of a slasher,
Then
influence than
yeah.
Psycho video, which I think is a good video unto itself. So both are relevant, but um, I what was I saying?
You were just saying I'll say one more thing.
Ah,
And that's
shit.
all you said.
Oh, I was really kind of blown away by how, um, it's not graphic by any means, but for
Mm,
this era, just thinking about the lengths that Hitchcock had to go to, he
yeah.
had to like self-finance the film himself. He had to like go to war with the ratings board and all that stuff. And I don't even know if it was the rating board or the people who approved the film because I don't even know if they had ratings boards. Did they have ratings boards
I
back
don't
then?
know.
I forget. I watched that Hitchcock movie with Anthony Hopkins playing Hitchcock, and he went in, and whether it's like their approval or not, and whether or not, because I don't, whatever it was, he had to go to war with these guys to get his film freaking released, whether it was with like an R rating or something, or even to get in the film at all,
Mm,
theaters at all, whatever it was, and that was because it like featured a flushing toilet and insinuated certain things and whatever. This movie,
there's a
Peeping Tom, has
lot.
like a ton, a ton of naked chicks like plastered everywhere
Yeah,
on the walls.
photographs and
Very obviously obscene photos of
yeah,
women and like,
and also the professions of some of the women too that are in here. Like there's
sure.
prostitutes and like porn star or not porn stars, but like I don't know what they were called then, but like the women that are taking the naughty photos.
Yeah.
And yeah, like it's really sleazy. That's like the best word to describe it. And just like him too being a peeping tom, like it's a really kinky weird thing that he does where he's a voyeur, and
He
that
more like,
also feels like it would be like super taboo to talk about.
this is such a different film than I was
Me
expecting it to
too. I
be.
don't know what I was expecting, but
I was expecting him to be like watching from afar. I was expecting him to be peeping into
yeah,
women's windows
he
and
does that.
watching barely,
But it's mostly like he's
barely.
a peeping tom because he like is
He,
recording
yes, he's
or
a peeping
filming
tom
or
because
whatever.
he's more of like a filming tom,
I know.
right?
But like that's the whole thing is that it's like his film is like his life and how he sees things through. It's really interesting. His character is really interesting. Definitely want to watch it again.
because the origins of the term Peeping Tom comes from Lady Godiva riding bareback, like nude on a horse, and like everyone in town agreed to like not watch because she was trying to get like lower taxes or something for the people in town, and she like her husband agreed to accommodate her wishes if she was to ride through town naked on a horse.
What?
And so she took off riding to do it, and but like people were like aware this was going to happen, so like everyone agreed like let's just go in our houses, we're not going to look. But there was a guy named Tom that couldn't resist,
and like so such a
and
he
watched from his window Lady Godiva ride past, and
this
he like went blind.
What?
From like the sight of her or whatever. I'm telling you, look it up. That's you don't know this?
No. Okay, what? But... No. Of course I don't know this. I don't know this. You don't know where the origin of Peeping Tom came from?
But yeah, I mean, it's like somebody watching through their window.
Yeah.
A woman who is exposed.
Yeah.
And that's just not the case here, right?
No.
You know, I doubt that the director of this was like, oh, I'm going to go back to the origins of Lady Godiva.
Yeah.
But what I'm saying is that I was expecting this to be more of like Rear Window in reverse, where it's like the Peeping Tom across the way.
Yeah.
Was watching the girls and fantasizing about them and like coming into their house while they're like, because he's like learning their behavior by watching them, and then watching till they go to sleep and breaking into their house, and living in their life while they, because that's I can show you a movie like that that's phenomenal. But so yeah, much different film than I expected, and the Technicolor is gorgeous. Such a weird like saturation of color in these old films like this. Yeah, it looks
really cool.
It doesn't look real. It looks like film. It looks fantasy.
Yeah, it definitely does. Peeping Tom, Mark would really like the guy from 13 Cameras.
Yeah.
He'd be like, what?
Weirdly, his character not the way he acts or anything, but the relationship he has with his neighbor actually slightly reminded me of the relationship that Ryan Gosling has in Drive.
Oh.
Drive. His character's name is Driver in Drive, where he's like, falls for the girl who lives next door to him, and they're in the same building, and the way they like interact and whatever. I was just thinking about that, and those kinds of films where everyone who knows each other in the same building, like Breakfast at Tiffany's or any of that kind of stuff. Anyway, okay, that's it. I loved it. I'm so sad I waited so long to watch this, but this is definitely my first view, and will not be my last. So we'll be looking for it on a 4K Blu-ray something. Let me know in the comments below what the best transfer of this movie is, and if you have it, and what's worth picking up and where to get it. So I'll appreciate that. We love you guys, and we'll see you in the next video. Sorry it's been so long.
Sorry. Bye.